From Utah and current Fox News contributor Jason Chaffetz. Good evening. Do I still call you Congressman?
Oh, you can call me Jason. Call me whatever you want, Judge.
No, I get it. It's good to have you on tonight, Jason, and welcome to the Fox family. All right. So right now, what I'm concerned about is the message to law enforcement, what has happened in terms of the normalization of cop hatred.
Well, look, there are a lot of reasons why Donald Trump became the president of the United States, and I think the law enforcement component was a big part of it. President Trump went over to Europe and talked about putting America first, made in America, American exceptionalism. Then you have the mayor of New York City go over there and say that Donald Trump, as the president, doesn't represent the United States of America. I mean, that is so infuriating and so fundamentally totally wrong. It is an embarrassment to this country. I can't believe that the citizens of New York City put up with this guy in doing that. It just undercut the president, and it should never have ever happened.
Well, you know what's interesting, Congressman, is the fact that, I'm calling you Congressman, that his press person said it is important that American leaders, I assume he's talking about de Blasio, confront head-on, locally and around the world, the damaging rhetoric and policy stances of the Trump administration. I mean, as if he thinks this guy should be on the world stage. And by the way, one of those popular newspapers in New York says, de Blasio, don't come back.
Yeah, I saw that. The New York Post, I think they actually got it right. Look, you had a police officer assassinated. You have 500 plus new cadets coming into the system, and the mayor is running off to join a protest where you have literally these anarchists who are fighting and hitting and trying to cause damage to police officers who are just trying to create peace. And Donald Trump is over there as the president of the United States, supporting our NATO allies, talking about the need to fight ISIS, trying to squelch the uprising that's happening in North Korea. All of these things that America does believe in, and the New York mayor is over there leading the protests of those that are fighting the cops, causing more than 200 people, police officers in Germany, to have to go to the hospital.
So what do we do about this?
Well, you got to draw attention to it. It's infuriating. It's absolutely wrong. And you know what? It's not just a New York City issue. Even us out here in Utah, and I'm sure all across the country, are absolutely embarrassed by this mayor taking it onto himself, thinking he represents the United States of America. He does not represent the values of the United States of America.
Well, not only does he not represent the values of the United States, but he's working against those values. Yeah. He doesn't believe in capitalism. He thinks that he's this socialist leader. And what's amazing is, you know, he held until 90 minutes before he left the fact that he was, you know, blowing town to go to Germany. I mean, he's very secretive, and he's very cagey about who he is and what he's doing. What do you think this guy thinks he's ultimately going to end up?
I don't know. I would love to know who paid for that trip. Where did he stay? I don't think he was sitting back in coach eating peanuts along the way.
Well, he's saying that the organization paid for him to go there, but we taxpayers are paying for his security detail. We sent 4 there about 5 days ago, and there's another 4 traveling with him, so he's got 8 security detail we're paying for it, and also his whole detail, the press people, you know, all of those guys we're paying for. So, you know, but let me ask you this. When Donald Trump says law enforcement and the military did a spectacular job in Hamburg, everybody felt totally safe despite the anarchists, what do you think he can do coming back home to help the police in this country?
Well, look, I think his mere presence has totally helped the Border Patrol, the Secret Service, the law enforcement community at large. Donald Trump has said, look, we're going to get more resources, more effort behind you. We love you. We're committed to you. And that has resonated. You can feel the difference. It's just, it is palatable how much better it is with Donald Trump, because he talks about putting America first, only to have the mayor of New York City go out and say, well, that doesn't represent the United States of America. Are you kidding me?
It is amazing. Jason Chaffetz, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks, Judge.
All right. And breaking tonight, President Trump back in the United States, arriving within the hour from the G20 summit, where he pledged that North Korea threat will be resolved, quote, one way or the other. The president made the pledge in a meeting with China's president before Mr. Trump left for home today from the G20 summit. Joining me now to talk about the threat and the president's comments is Deputy Assistant Dr. Sebastian Gorka. Dr. Gorka, thanks so much for being with us. Look, I'm not saying anything that you don't already know, and that is that Americans are very concerned about this wackadoo nut job over in North Korea, sending us a birthday present in an attempt to send over an intercontinental ballistic missile with a nuclear tip on it. What are we going to do about that?
Well, the president took the opportunity. He showed leadership again. He met at the G20 with the president of South Korea. He met with Prime Minister Abe of Japan. They sat down. They want to ratchet up the pressure. They're calling the U.S., Japan, and South Korea are going to call for a new UN Security Council resolution against the North. The president also met with Xi Jinping. They reaffirmed their commitment to denuclearize the whole peninsula. So we're taking action. Right now it's peaceful action, Judge. It's a campaign of peaceful pressure. We're going to see if it works. But if it doesn't work, there are other options. And the president has been clear. This is a grave, grave escalation.
Has the president given up on China helping us out?
No, I think the meeting today was part and parcel of trying to get back on track, that kind of spirit that came out of the Mar-a-Lago summit, whereby China has more capacity to pressure in the non-kinetic domain its neighbor than any other nation in the world. But the president was clear. He was disappointed with what came after those commitments. Right. So we're going to give it one more try, but all the options are on the table. And look what the president signaled already, whether it's the Moab bomb in Afghanistan, whether it's the 59 cruise missiles in Syria, we understand, and this president understands, that force is always an option in statecraft. And
in fact, we just sent two U.S. bombers that were flying near the demilitarized zone with South Korean and Japanese jets on a training mission. That's pretty loud and clear, and I doubt that China would want Japan to have a nuclear weapon, but I can't imagine that that isn't on the table in terms of at least protecting our interests.
Well, China has looked at North Korea for decades, for more than a half century now, as this kind of buffer between itself and other nations like South Korea. But at some point, there has to be a realization, just how much are you willing to pay for that buffer if it creates instability, if it's in flagrant disregard of numerous Security Council resolutions on weapons of mass destruction, on rocket technology, on ballistic testing. That buffer becomes a danger to China as well. And that's the message that has to be understood, and that's what the message that the president's going to be giving to everybody.
Well, without getting into this, I seem to recall that there were some cyber attacks that prevented North Korea from accomplishing some of their goals. So cyber warfare is certainly on the table as well.
If you understand how to rudder the ship of state, then you don't just talk non-kinetic, you don't just use diplomacy. That's the last 8 years. That's the empty rhetoric of leading from behind. This president, in just a scant 24 weeks, has shown the world he understands how force has to back up diplomacy. But between peace and war, as you said, there's a massive scale of other options. And we're not going to comment on live television, even with our friends, about what we do or do not do in the cyber domain, but there are lots of tools. We are a hyperpower, Judge. We're not a superpower, we are a hyperpower, and we have lots of things we can do, covert and otherwise.
And you know, when I interviewed General Kelly about a month ago, he said that there is no doubt in his mind that within the first 4 years of the Trump administration, that Kim Jong-un will have the capacity, if he's not already in a position of having that capacity.
Look, the point is, this president is not a president you want to test. This isn't a man who's apologetic for who we are. Look at the Warsaw speech. Look at what he stands for. We are reinvigorating America. And that means standing up for our values, and it means protecting our friends and our partners. And it's a very, very bad idea to test Donald J. Trump.
Well said. Dr. Sebastian Gorka, thanks so much for joining us again tonight.
Thanks, Judge.
All right, we've heard from a former congressman. So what does a current lawmaker think of President Trump's trip? Congressman Ron DeSantis is here live coming up. But next, it's Tommy time. Tomi Lahren is standing by live to talk about the Trump trip, the meeting with Putin, and so much more. She's next. And later, it all started with my trip to the inauguration. Tonight, the best of street justice of the first half of 2017. Stay with us as justice rolls on.
A couple of years ago, I went back home and I had a long beard, and I was stopped at the airport. Well, not really stopped.
All right, you were stopped. You were questioned. Did they let you through?
They did.
Okay, let's get over it. What now? A light moment as the president arrives back at Joint Base Andrews tonight from the G20 summit. The hat of a Marine standing at attention blows off in the wind, and it's the president himself who retrieves it. President Trump, as always, a man of the people. All right. Meantime, the nation reacting tonight to the president's overseas trip and a series of meetings at the G20 summit, including his much-anticipated sit-down with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Joining me now to talk about all of it, political commentator Tomi Lahren. Tomi, thanks for joining us. Your first time on Justice. We're happy to have you here. Tomi, I want to start with the meeting of Trump and Putin. Is there anything that the left-wing media can see that came out positive on that?
Well, of course not. They are too busy talking about body language, how long it lasted. And, I got to say this, what I find very disappointing from, the unloving and intolerant left is that though they seem to stand up for tolerance and for acceptance for the LGBT community, they seem to not have a problem with posting memes of President Trump and President Putin in a negative light. So that, first of all, is very disappointing. But, the leftist mainstream media, they could really care less about the positive advancements and the America First agenda and how positive this trip was. They're going to poke any hole that they can, and they, of course, chose this meeting to do it. All right. I want you to listen to something. This is Secretary of State Rex Tillerson talking about the meeting between Trump and Putin.
They had a very robust and lengthy exchange on the subject. The president pressed President Putin on more than one occasion regarding Russian involvement. President Putin denied such involvement, as I think he has in the past.
And what's interesting about that is that, the left is saying, this really wasn't Donald Trump pressing on the Russian meddling thing. But I sometimes wonder, if President Trump accuses Putin or asks him about the Russian so-called meddling, then they could go back and forth for the whole 2 hours and 15 minutes that they met. And what does he expect? Putin to confess one way or the other? They have to move on and talk about something forward.
Well, the mainstream media can't move on, and they seem to think because they're obsessed with this narrative that the American people need to be obsessed with it as well. And so they spend all of their time talking about, well, did he push him enough? They seem to want us to start aggressions with Russia because John Podesta and Debbie Wasserman Schultz couldn't protect their emails. So they seem to want to go to war with Russia over that, while the rest of the American people are thinking, why don't we get some reform done? Why don't we build a wall? Why don't we put America first?
Well, and the amazing part of it is that for all the months of the so-called collusion, I mean, nobody can come up with one iota of evidence. And did you notice, Tomi, that there's starting to be less and less talk about the Russian collusion because they're going to look like fools at the end, although, who knows what Mueller and his Trump-hating team are going to end up doing. But finally, what do you think of the fact that, according to those who were there, that Trump and Putin connected very quickly and that they had positive chemistry?
I think that's fantastic. Anytime we can have our leader connect with a foreign leader and have a productive conversation, everyone wins in this situation. I don't know about you, but I'm not tired of winning yet. So if we can actually have a Russia restart that the last two administrations failed to do, why would anyone have an issue with that? That's what I don't understand.
And, you know, the amazing part also is that people seem to not recognize the mutual interest that we may have as it relates to Syria and the fact that they actually signed a memorandum of a de-escalation agreement in, I believe it's southwest Syria, with the United States, Russia, and Jordan. I mean, all that is extremely positive. And when you think about, you know, Obama dancing with the devil in Tehran as they yell death to America, it seems kind of hypocritical, wouldn't you say?
Well, of course, but they are still, again, bitter that Hillary didn't become president, and they think that the reason for that is because of the Russians and because of Putin. So they will not let that go, because then they would have to actually accept the results of the election and move on. They would actually have to put forth policy positions and have an agenda, but we know that that's not their favorite thing to do. So instead, they're just going to beat this dead narrative until, I don't know, 2020, when we win again. I don't know. I think that sounds good to me, though.
Yeah, it sounds good to me as well. Now, are you in Dallas now, Tommy?
I am.
Okay. So Dallas has just, you know, recognized the 1 year, or realized, I should say, the 1 year anniversary of the shooting of 5 cops in Dallas. I mean, how do you think, as you look back on the last year, this cop hatred can be stopped going forward?
Well, I will say that the election of President Trump is a great step forward, and many of my friends here in Dallas are in law enforcement, and I tell you, having the support of the president behind them for the first time in 8 years is refreshing. But I tell you about Dallas. This city is lit blue. It's going to be lit blue for probably for many days to come, because we really rally around our law enforcement here. And, you know, it's a somber mood, but it's also uplifting and it's inspiring, because we remember what we did and how we came together to support our law enforcement. And I think that that's what's great about Dallas.
And you know what? I remember the police chief. I was so impressed with the Dallas police chief. Anyway, Tomi Lahren, good to have you on. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Your favorite moments of street justice since the inauguration in January coming up. Plus, Congressman Ron DeSantis. But next, President Trump's trip from 2 very different points of view. Lawrence Jones and Chris Hahn, my political panel, standing by to battle it out. Don't go away.
Live from America's News headquarters, I'm Jackie Ibanez. State election officials from across the United States addressing some major concerns when it comes to the nation's voting system. Election officials are in Indianapolis for a meeting of the National Association of Secretaries of State. The meeting is focused on recent attempts to breach voting systems, namely allegations that Russian officials interfered in the 2016 presidential election. And a blistering heat wave has broken a 131-year-old record in Los Angeles. And the heat has only fueled a wildfire burning out of control in Santa Barbara County. Fire officials there say that the fire tripled in size in just about 8 hours. Right now, it's only about 10% contained. Hundreds have been evacuated for safety. The area is under an excessive heat warning with triple-digit temperatures expected. I'm Jackie Ibanez. Now back to justice with Judge Jeanine for all of your headlines. Log on to foxnews.com.
Welcome back to Justice. GOP Congressman Ron DeSantis and the best of street justice still on deck tonight. But first, it's time for the panel. Radio talk show host Lawrence Jones is here, as well as former aide to Senator Schumer, and also a radio talk show host, Chris Hahn. All right, gentlemen, President just back in the last hour on U.S. soil. What's your take on the meeting at the G20? I'll start with you, Chris.
Well, look, you know, I've been hearing a lot of conservatives talk about it. It reminds me of the George W. Bush saying, let's be careful about the soft bigotry of low expectations. The president didn't put his foot in his mouth, I'll give him that. He didn't start a war. He didn't lash out at President Xi Jinping's tie or anything like that. I want to know what happened in that Russian meeting. Did he give back the sanctions that President Obama put on them after the election? If in the next couple of weeks we find out that he gave back those 2 consulates, we're going to be very upset about that as Americans.
Okay, I'm going to let Lawrence Jones answer this, but here's what I want to say. You know what? You guys ought to put up or shut up on this Russian collusion thing, but
well,
go ahead, Lawrence Jones.
Well,
go ahead, Lawrence.
Okay. Yeah, we've heard it, Chris. Here's the deal. The president went into Putin. He called him out with his actions in Syria. He told the Russian president that he knew about what was happening with the trying to interfere with the election, although it did not affect the outcome of the election. He still wanted to know what Putin was doing. He held him accountable on that. But then he moved on and started to talk about other stuff, like, for example, the ceasefire in Syria. That is all news that the media should be reporting, but they would like to continue to talk about Russia in collusion with Donald Trump.
Okay,
and
Chris,
double agent, which has been proven false.
Would have been nice if the president stood before the press and answered some questions about what happened in that meeting, but he didn't do that. And let me just point out one other thing about collusion.
Why do you guys need to know?
The AP is reporting in the last 2 hours that Kushner, Manafort, and Donald Trump Jr. met with a Kremlin-affiliated lawyer right after he became the nominee of the Republican Party. Now, I don't know that that says there's collusion, but I want to know what that happened at that meeting
You know what, Chris? Let me tell you something. Go ahead, Larry.
Are you guys going to lay off these sources? Even your guy's boy Comey testified before Congress and said all these sources and leaking coming out cannot be verified. So stop listening to these leaks and get some factual information.
Boy? How is Comey my boy?
I'm talking about Chris.
And you know what, Chris? It's even worse than that. Chris, hang on. It's even worse than that. Jim Comey allowed a New York Times story to say that the Trump campaign coordinated with Russian intelligence since February 15th or 14th, okay? And Comey would not put truth to the lie. They want this crap to keep going.
I don't think anybody wants it to keep going, Judge. I think we want to know what happened and figure out how we can stop it. We need to stop it from happening in the future. I'm not saying he colluded, but the Russians were definitely here, and the president doesn't seem too concerned about it.
You know,
that's what Democrats are saying, Chris. They're saying that he colluded with Russia, and you even have people.
I'm not saying he colluded.
Podesta,
I have no evidence
You even
of
have
that.
people like Podesta, Chris, saying that Russia is responsible for Donald Trump's victory. This is why the president has such a hard time in these press conferences talking about the Russia stuff, because you guys keep trying to link it to his victory, and you know that's not true.
Putin had a press conference at the G20. Even Putin had a press conference. Why couldn't he have a press conference?
You know, Hillary Clinton didn't have a press conference for months. She was running for president. People wanted to know what she thought.
And
she was roping herself off from the press, but I digress.
He's the president.
All right, I want to talk
he needs
about
press conferences.
I want to talk about the voter registration stuff, where apparently 30 states have said that they will cooperate with the voter what is it? The voter registration committee, and 30 states have said yes, 16 states have said no, and 4 said maybe. What do you think of that, Chris?
I think that I'm very concerned what this committee is up to right now. Chris Kubiak, who's the chair of that committee, he has a long history of trying to put in voter suppression measures across this country, and I don't trust him as far as I can throw him.
What you mean, voter ID, Chris?
Well.
Go ahead, Lawrence.
You mean voter ID? You need an ID.
Let's cut down on motor voting. Anything he can do.
Chris, one at a time, please. Go ahead, Lawrence.
Chris, what is wrong with having an ID when you go to vote? You need an ID for everything else. What's wrong with the ID?
But you know what? I don't want to get into the ID. Here is the problem. The Voter Registration Commission or Voter Identification Commission, they want to be able to clear the voter rolls. And there is a federal law that requires that states do that to prevent people who are dead from voting 2 or 3 times after they died. And the Obama administration was totally against it. And now what you've got are people who just want to make sure that people who shouldn't vote don't vote. What's wrong with that, Chris?
Judge, the Supreme Court has said time and time again that voter rolls and how we vote is left up to the states. All these Republicans who want to leave things up to the states, except for things that they want to suppress the states from doing, like voting. So that's kind of hypocritical. This is something that's within the purview of the states, and it should be left with the states. And having some big national commission collecting all the data for reasons we're not quite sure of is weird.
Stop already. There is a federal law. You're wrong, Chris. And the federal law says that there is a mandate.
That federal law gets challenged,
Stop
Judge.
it, Chris. Stop. There is a federal law that mandates that the states clean up their voter registration lists and conduct maintenance so that there isn't corruption, and the Obama administration denied it. Now, why would they do that? Lawrence, you got 2 seconds.
It's a 10th Amendment
Under
thing.
Tom Perez, because they had Tom Perez as the Assistant Attorney General, and he did not want to implement the standards. He is now the chairman of the Democratic Party. So we know what his political motivations were.
All right. Guys,
It's
got to go.
called the
Lively
10th Amendment,
discussion.
Lawrence. I know you've
Jones,
read it.
Chris Hahn, thanks so much
It's a
for being
fact.
with us. And street justice still ahead. And next, Florida Congressman Ron DeSantis with his take on a big week in the Trump administration. Don't go away. Welcome back to Justice. President Trump back in Washington tonight after a history-making trip overseas at the G20 summit. Here to talk about that and more is Republican Congressman from the state of Florida, Ron DeSantis. Congressman, thanks so much for being with us.
Good evening.
All right. Now, President just back on American soil. What's your take of the G20 meeting?
Well, I think it was a very successful trip for the president. His Warsaw speech in Poland was one of the best speeches that an American president has given overseas. It was very Reagan-esque, Kennedy-esque, and really Churchillian in terms of identifying the West as something to be fought for, identifying threats from radical Islamic terrorism very clearly. He also called out Russia, which the media is in a tizzy about. And then he also identified the creeping statism and bureaucracy, both in America and in Europe, as a problem that threatens Western values. And that really harkens back to Alexis de Tocqueville. So I thought that was a tour de force. I thought it was very well received, and I was proud of him.
You know what I find interesting is he had a scheduled meeting with Putin for 30 minutes. It went on for 2 hours and 15 minutes. And they apparently, according to reports, had some chemistry, both of them strong personalities. But you know what? To me, it seems that it's the Donald Trump aura, the charisma of President Trump. And what I found fascinating was that video where we saw President Macron from France kind of moving around trying to get next to Donald Trump, like, excuse me. And, you know, he just is this charismatic person. And I suspect that going forward, we're going to have a lot more allies who believe in us.
I think that's right. He really strikes a strong presence on the world stage. I think he sends a signal that America's back in terms of being a leader of the free world. I mean, it would have been unthinkable for Barack Obama to have given that speech in Poland. That's just not who Obama was. He didn't really believe in Western values per se. So I think that people realize there's a new sheriff in town, and I think that they do want to curry favor with him. And sometimes it's because he is a gregarious guy, and that's great. But part of it is also is they realize it's probably not smart to challenge the United States now.
Okay, let me move on now to health care. The House passed their own version of the health care bill. It's in the Senate. Latest reports are that it ain't happening. And that certainly is frustrating given the fact that deductibles are so high that insurance companies are dropping out. Premiums are through the roof. I mean, what would you say to your Republican colleagues in the Senate?
They need to get it done, Judge. We've been campaigning as Republicans for years and years. Every one of them in the Senate has voted at one time or another to fully repeal Obamacare. Now it's crunch time, and people are kind of getting weak, and their spines aren't stiff anymore. And they may be fumbling a historic opportunity to deliver on a promise that we made. And I think that if they fail, I think it'll be disastrous for the country because, as you said, there will be no relief from any of the rising premiums and deductibles that people are suffering under. And that's what we've been promising we would address. And so to back down now, I think would be a very, very bad thing.
And we're doing nothing but giving the Democrats some fodder for the next election. But let me ask you this, more a philosophical question, Congressman. You know, there are those senators who say that they were elected to do X, Y, or Z, and that therefore they can't go back to their constituents without requiring, say, Senator Cruz or Ron Paul, certain things or certain interest in the health care bill. Does an elected official have an obligation not just to his constituency, but to the party, to his president, that might even be bigger than his individual constituents?
Well, I think the core is your constituents, and then when you legislate, you're legislating for the whole country. So you do have an obligation of how this is going to affect everybody else in the country. And the way I look at it is the way Reagan looked at it. I want to get everything I want, but if I can get 80% now, then I'll go ahead and take that. And that's basically what we did in the House on the health care bill, because I would have liked to have been more aggressive and just done the clean repeal. We didn't necessarily have the votes for that, so we moved forward with what we could get done. So I hope the senators will do something similar.
And quickly, I have about 15 seconds. Mitch McConnell said there's no way we're going to repeal first and replace later. Why?
We can do it. We should have done that in January. In hindsight, the Democrats then may have been willing to actually work with a replacement. But as long as Obamacare is still on the books, they're going to say no, no, no. And so it was probably a tactical mistake, and we should do that if we can't get it done.
Congressman Ron DeSantis, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you.
And my favorite moments of the past 6 months in Street Justice. That's next. Stay with us.